Commander Zethkar stood on the bridge of the Hegemony Dreadnought Stellar Dominion, his forearms crossed behind his back as he observed the tactical display. The holographic projection showed the third planet of this unremarkable yellow star system, a blue and green world the locals called Earth. Intelligence reports indicated this was the homeworld of a recently discovered species that had somehow managed to develop rudimentary space travel despite their primitive technology. Commander called out his tactical officer, a slender Vorthack with pale blue skin and large black eyes, were receiving multiple distress signals from the surface. It appears the humans are engaged in some form of large-scale conflict. Zethkar's mandibles clicked together in what his species considered amusement. Of course they are. These primitive species always resort to violence when faced with challenges they cannot comprehend. What type of weapons are they using? Stone clubs? Metal projectiles? The tactical officer's expression shifted to confusion as he studied his readings more carefully. Sir, the energy signatures are unusual. They appear to be using chemical explosives, kinetic projectiles fired at extremely high velocities, and some form of directed energy weapons. The scale of destruction is far beyond what we would expect from a pre-space civilization. Impossible, Zethkar replied, his tone dismissive. Show me the surface. The main viewing screen shifted to display a real-time feed of the planet's surface. What Zethkar saw made his secondary heart skip a beat. Vast continents were dotted with flashing lights, and massive plumes of smoke rose from hundreds of locations. The humans weren't just fighting with primitive weapons, they were engaged in what appeared to be a coordinated global conflict using technology that shouldn't exist for a species at their development level. Zoom in on the largest conflict zone, Zethkar ordered, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. The screen focused on what appeared to be a massive plain where two enormous armies faced each other. The hegemony sensors revealed details that made Zethkar's stomach twist. Mobile armored vehicles that could level buildings moved in perfect formation. Aircraft streaked across the sky, engaging in aerial combat with a precision and ferocity that would make veteran hegemony pilots nervous. Artillery pieces fired projectiles across distances that covered dozens of kilometers, each impact creating explosions visible from orbit. Sir, the communications officer interrupted, we're intercepting human military transmissions. Their tactical coordination is remarkable. They're using encrypted channels, satellite networks, and real-time data sharing across multiple command structures simultaneously. Zethkar moved closer to the tactical display, his scientist's mind struggling to process what he was observing. This cannot be accurate. Run a full diagnostic on all sensors. All systems functioning normally, Commander, the technical officer reported. The readings are correct. These humans have developed military technology that rivals some of our older weapon systems, and they're employing tactical strategies that demonstrate a level of strategic thinking we typically only see in spacefaring civilizations. The viewing screen continued to show the battle below. Human soldiers moved with a coordination that spoke of extensive training and discipline. They used the terrain to their advantage, employed diversionary tactics, and adapted their strategies in real time as the situation changed. What disturbed Zethkar most was the efficiency of their killing. These weren't the chaotic, emotion-driven conflicts he expected from a primitive species. This was warfare elevated to an art form. Commander, the sensor operator called out urgently, I'm detecting massive energy buildups at multiple locations across the planet. The humans appear to be preparing to deploy weapons of unprecedented destructive capability. Zethkar's primary hearts began beating faster. What kind of weapons? Nuclear fusion devices, sir. Hundreds of them. The yield calculations suggest they could render large portions of their planet uninhabitable. The bridge fell silent except for the humming of the ship's systems. Zethkar had commanded hegemony forces for over 2 decades, had witnessed the conquest of dozens of worlds, and had seen civilizations that had mastered interstellar travel. But he had never encountered a pre-space species that possessed weapons capable of destroying their own planet. Sir, the communications officer said quietly, I've been analyzing their military communications protocols. Their command structure is more sophisticated than our own. They have multiple redundant systems, decentralized decision-making capabilities, and what appears to be advanced artificial intelligence assisting their strategic planning. Zethkar stared at the tactical display, watching as human forces maneuvered with a precision that would be impressive even for hegemony marines. These beings had not yet mastered faster-than-light travel, had never left their solar system, yet they had developed military capabilities that could potentially threaten hegemony ground forces.
"Show me their space-based assets," Sethkar commanded. The display shifted to show Earth's orbital space.
Dozens of artificial satellites moved in precise orbits, some clearly designed for communication, others for surveillance, and several that the ship's computers identified as weapons platforms. The humans had militarized their orbital space with an efficiency that spoke of careful planning and considerable resources. "Commander," the tactical officer reported, "I'm reading several satellites that appear to be equipped with kinetic bombardment systems.
They could deliver tungsten rods to any point on the planet's surface with pinpoint accuracy and devastating effect."
Sethkar felt his confidence in hegemony's superiority beginning to crack.
"How long until our ground forces are ready for planetary assault?" 12 hours, sir. "But, Commander, based on these readings, I would strongly recommend requesting additional support.
These humans may be more challenging to subdue than initially projected." The viewing screen showed another aspect of the human conflict that made Sethkar pause. Despite the incredible violence and destruction, he could see evidence of something he had never witnessed in any pre-space civilization: mercy. Human medical units moved across battlefields under clearly marked symbols, treating wounded soldiers from both sides. Evacuation aircraft removed non-combatants from conflict zones.
Even in the midst of total war, these beings maintained some form of ethical code.
"Sir," the intelligence officer spoke up, "I've been analyzing their historical records.
This species has been engaged in continuous warfare for their entire recorded history.
They have refined the art of combat over thousands of years, developing strategies and technologies specifically designed for fighting their own kind."
Sethkar processed this information with growing unease.
The hegemony had conquered hundreds of worlds, but they typically faced civilizations that had developed along predictable technological paths.
Most species focused on exploration, trade, or scientific advancement once they achieved basic spaceflight.
They developed defensive capabilities out of necessity, not as a primary focus.
Humans appeared to be different.
They had spent millennia perfecting the art of warfare against opponents with identical capabilities and intelligence. Every weapon, every tactic, every strategy had been tested against enemies who could adapt and counter their moves. They had essentially been engaged in an arms race with themselves for their entire history.
"Commander," the sensor operator announced, "I'm detecting movement in their orbital defense network.
Several satellites are adjusting their positions to achieve targeting solutions on our vessel." Sethkar spun around to face the tactical display.
"Are you saying they've detected us?"
"It appears so, sir.
Their sensor technology is more advanced than we anticipated.
They've not only detected our presence but are actively tracking our position and movement."
The implications hit Sethkar like a physical blow. Hegemony stealth technology had never been detected by a pre-space civilization.
These humans had somehow developed sensor capabilities that could penetrate their most advanced concealment systems. "Sir," the communications officer added, "I'm receiving a transmission directed specifically at our vessel. It's in their dominant language, but the computer has translated it. They're requesting that we identify ourselves and state our intentions." Sethkar stared at the communication console in disbelief. Not only had the humans detected his ship, but they were attempting to establish first contact protocols. A pre-space civilization was following diplomatic procedures with a species they had never encountered before. "What should I tell them, Commander?" the communications officer asked.
Before Sethkar could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. "Commander," the defensive systems operator shouted, "multiple incoming projectiles. They're firing on us." The main screen showed several trails of light ascending from the planet's surface, moving at incredible speeds toward their position. "Evasive maneuvers," Sethkar ordered. The stellar dominion shuddered as its engines engaged, moving the massive vessel away from its original position. The human projectiles adjusted their trajectories, continuing to track the ship's movement with an accuracy that defied explanation. "How are they doing this?" Sethkar demanded.
"Sir," the technical officer replied, his voice strained, "their targeting systems appear to be using predictive algorithms that account for our evasive capabilities.
They're not just firing at where we are, they're calculating where we'll be."
The first projectile struck the ship's shields, causing them to flare with energy. The impact sent vibrations through the hull that Sethkar could feel in his bones.
"Damage report." Shields down to 87%, sir.
But, Commander, the projectile that hit us was purely kinetic. No exotic materials, no advanced energy systems. Just a dense metal rod accelerated to near-relativistic speeds using what appears to be magnetic acceleration technology.
Zethkar's mind reeled.
These humans had developed weapons that could threaten hegemony vessels using nothing more than advanced applications of basic physics. They had taken simple concepts and refined them to levels that achieved results comparable to far more advanced civilizations.
Sir, the communications officer interrupted, I'm receiving another transmission from the surface. They're offering to cease hostilities if we agree to peaceful contact. They're proposing a meeting location in neutral space.
They're offering us terms?
Zethkar asked incredulously.
Yes, sir. They appear to be treating us as equals rather than superior beings to be feared or worshipped.
Zethkar looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew.
These were experienced military officers who had participated in dozens of successful planetary conquests.
Now they all wore expressions of uncertainty and concern.
The humans had shattered every assumption the hegemony held about pre-space civilizations. Commander, the tactical officer said quietly, I've completed my analysis of their military capabilities.
Based on current observations, a ground assault would result in unacceptable casualties. Their defensive positions are too well prepared, their weapons too advanced, and their tactical coordination too sophisticated.
We could eventually achieve victory, but the cost would be enormous. Zethkar stared at the planet below, watching as the human conflict continued to rage across multiple continents. These beings were fighting a global war using weapons that could threaten hegemony forces, yet they had still detected a ship and offered diplomatic solutions. They were simultaneously the most violent and most sophisticated pre-space civilization he had ever encountered.
Sir, the intelligence officer added, I've been analyzing their cultural databases.
These humans don't appear to fight for conquest or resources like most species. They fight for abstract concepts, freedom, justice, honor, protection of their civilians. They're willing to die for ideas rather than material gain. The observation sent a chill through Zethkar's nervous system.
The hegemony conquered planets for their resources and strategic value.
They understood fighting for survival or territorial expansion. But a species that would wage total war for philosophical principles was something entirely outside their experience. Another barrage of kinetic projectiles streaked upward from the planet's surface, forcing the stellar dominion to adjust position again. The humans weren't backing down despite facing a clearly superior space-based opponent. They were continuing to engage while simultaneously offering diplomatic solutions. Commander, the defensive systems operator reported, I'm detecting additional launches from multiple continental locations. They appear to be deploying some form of orbital denial network designed to prevent any vessel from maintaining a stable position near their planet.
Zethkar realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in hegemony history.
A pre-space civilization was successfully defending itself against a hegemony dreadnought using nothing but advanced applications of primitive technology and tactical brilliance that matched or exceeded their own military doctrine. The viewing screen showed the continuing human conflict below, but now Zethkar saw it differently.
This wasn't chaos or primitive violence.
This was a species that had spent its entire existence preparing for exactly this moment, contact with a potentially hostile alien civilization. Every war, every weapon, every tactical innovation had been a rehearsal for defending their world against threats they couldn't yet imagine. As another wave of projectiles forced his ship to retreat to a higher orbit, Zethkar began to understand that he was facing something the hegemony had never encountered before, a species that had evolved specifically to excel at warfare, not as a tool for conquest, but as a means of survival against any threat that might emerge from the darkness between the stars. Commander Zethkar stood motionless on the bridge of the stellar dominion, his four eyes fixed on the tactical display that showed Earth's defensive grid. The planet below had transformed from what he expected to be an easy conquest into something that defied every military doctrine the hegemony had developed over 3 centuries of galactic expansion.
Sir, the communications officer announced, we're receiving detailed technical specifications from the human government.
They're providing us with safe approach vectors, orbital mechanics data, and what appears to be a complete breakdown of their defensive capabilities. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in confusion.
They're showing us their weaknesses?
No, sir, the intelligence officer interjected after reviewing the data.
They're demonstrating their strengths.
Every piece of information they've sent us details redundant systems, overlapping fields of fire, and defensive positions that would require massive resources to overcome.
It's not a surrender document, it's a deterrent portfolio.
The main viewing screen shifted to show a new development on Earth's surface. The global conflict that had been raging when they arrived was beginning to wind down, but not in the way Zethkar expected. Instead of one side achieving victory through superior firepower, both armies were withdrawing to defensive positions while maintaining their combat readiness.
Analysis shows they're not ending their war, the tactical officer reported. They're reorganizing to face an external threat. Us.
Zethkar watched in fascination as human military units across multiple continents began coordinated movements. Supply lines that had been supporting opposing forces started redirecting resources toward orbital defense platforms. Artillery pieces that had been aimed at enemy positions swiveled upward toward the sky. Most remarkably, soldiers who had been trying to kill each other hours earlier were now working together to prepare for a common defense. "Commander," the sensor operator called out urgently, "I'm detecting massive energy signatures from their lunar satellite. They appear to have military installations we didn't detect during our initial survey."
The tactical display expanded to include Earth's moon, revealing a network of structures that had been hidden beneath the surface.
As Zethkar watched, sections of the lunar terrain shifted aside to reveal launching platforms, sensor arrays, and what appeared to be manufacturing facilities.
"How did we miss this during our approach?" Zethkar demanded.
"Sir, they used passive camouflage systems that mimicked natural geological formations. Our sensors identified them as crater formations and mineral deposits. The deception was nearly perfect."
Zethkar studied the lunar installations with a growing sense of unease.
The humans had established military positions throughout their local space, creating overlapping fields of fire that would make any assault extremely costly. More disturbing was the level of planning this represented. These installations hadn't been built in response to the hegemony's arrival, they had existed for years, possibly decades. "Sir," the intelligence officer announced, "I've been analyzing their historical records more thoroughly. These humans have been preparing for extraterrestrial contact for over a century. They've developed contingency plans for dozens of different first contact scenarios, including hostile encounters with technologically superior species." The communications officer looked up from his station with an expression of bewilderment. "Commander, I'm receiving a transmission that contains detailed psychological profiles of our crew, complete with personality assessments and predicted behavioral patterns."
"They've been analyzing us since we arrived." Zethkar felt his primary hearts begin racing. How could they possibly know anything about our psychology? We've never encountered their species before.
"Sir, they appear to have developed predictive models based on observed behavior patterns, ship design philosophy, and tactical approaches. Their analysis suggests they've been studying dozens of different alien contact scenarios and have created behavioral prediction matrices for each possibility." The viewing screen showed another development that made Zethkar's stomach turn. Human spacecraft were launching from multiple locations on Earth's surface, but these weren't military vessels. They appeared to be civilian craft carrying families away from major population centers. "They're evacuating non-combatants," the tactical officer observed. "But, sir, they're doing it with a level of organization that suggests they've practiced this scenario countless times." Zethkar watched as thousands of vehicles moved in perfect coordination, following evacuation routes that had clearly been planned and rehearsed extensively. Children and elderly humans were loaded onto transport craft with efficiency that would be impressive in hegemony logistics operations. Most remarkably, there was no panic, no chaos. The human population was responding to an alien threat with calm preparation.
"Commander," the sensor operator announced, "I'm detecting launches from their asteroid mining operations. They appear to have military assets distributed throughout their inner solar system."
The tactical display expanded again, revealing human installations on asteroids, space stations positioned at strategic points throughout the solar system, and mining operations that doubled as military supply depots. The humans hadn't just militarized their homeworld and its moon, they had created a defensive network that extended throughout their local space. "Sir," the intelligence officer said quietly, "I'm reading classified documents that suggest these humans have been planning for this encounter for generations. They call it the Great Filter Scenario, the moment when their species would be tested by contact with a superior alien civilization." Zethkar studied the data streams flowing across his command console. The humans had transformed their entire solar system into a fortress, not through rapid militarization in response to their arrival, but through decades of careful planning and preparation. They had assumed that any alien species capable of interstellar travel would be potentially hostile and had prepared accordingly. "Show me their weapon systems again," Zethkar ordered. The tactical display revealed the full scope of human military capability. Kinetic bombardment platforms capable of delivering tungsten rods to any point in their solar system. Fusion-powered projectile systems that could accelerate metal slugs to significant fractions of light speed. Most disturbing were the weapons that appeared to be designed specifically for space combat: electromagnetic pulse generators, plasma beam arrays, and what appeared to be some form of directed gravity manipulation technology. "Commander," the technical officer reported, "their weapons aren't just advanced for a pre-space civilization. Some of these systems are more sophisticated than our own equipment. They've achieved comparable results using completely different technological approaches." Zethkar began to understand something that shook his fundamental beliefs about hegemony superiority. The humans had developed their technology under different pressures than spacefaring species typically experienced. While most civilizations focused on exploration and expansion once they achieved spaceflight, humans had spent their entire existence competing against equally intelligent opponents. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "I'm receiving a formal diplomatic proposal from the human government. They're offering to share their defensive technologies in exchange for peaceful coexistence and limited technology transfer." "They want to trade with us?" Zethkar asked incredulously. "Yes, sir. They're proposing a mutual defense pact and suggesting that hegemony forces could benefit from studying human tactical innovations. They're treating us as potential partners rather than conquerors." Zethkar looked at the proposal flowing across his communications display. The humans were offering detailed specifications for their defensive systems, tactical doctrine that had been refined through centuries of warfare, and strategic planning methodologies that could enhance hegemony military operations. They were proposing to teach their would-be conquerors how to fight more effectively. "Commander," the intelligence officer added, "their proposal includes analysis suggesting that the hegemony's expansion methods are inefficient. They claim that conquest-based growth creates more problems than it solves and that cooperative development would yield better results for all species involved." The audacity of the statement hit Zethkar like a physical blow. A pre-space civilization was criticizing hegemony expansion doctrine and offering alternative strategies for galactic development. They weren't just defending themselves, they were suggesting improvements to a civilization that had been conquering worlds for centuries. "Sir," the tactical officer called out, "I'm detecting movement throughout their defensive network. All systems are powering up to full operational status, but they're not targeting us. They appear to be conducting a demonstration." The viewing screen showed human weapons platforms across their solar system activating simultaneously. Kinetic bombardment systems fired test shots at predetermined targets in empty space. Energy weapons discharged controlled bursts that created spectacular light shows visible from orbit. Most impressive were the gravity manipulation devices that seemed to bend space itself, creating localized distortions that could potentially disable enemy spacecraft. "They're showing us what they could do to us," Zethkar realized. "Yes, sir," the tactical officer confirmed. "But they're doing it while simultaneously maintaining their offer for peaceful negotiations. They're demonstrating strength while extending friendship." Zethkar studied the display showing hundreds of human weapons systems operating at full capacity. Any one of these installations would be a significant threat to hegemony forces. Together, they represented a defensive capability that could potentially destroy his entire fleet. Yet the humans were using this demonstration of power to support diplomatic overtures rather than threats. "Commander," the communications officer announced, "I'm receiving personal messages from individual human military officers. They're expressing professional respect for hegemony tactical capabilities and suggesting that our species could learn from each other." Zethkar read some of the messages appearing on his display. Human officers were analyzing hegemony ship design, tactical formations, and operational procedures with the eye of professionals recognizing excellence in their field. They weren't expressing fear or hostility, they were showing genuine appreciation for military competence. "Sir," the intelligence officer added, "I've been studying their military academies and training programs. These humans spend years studying historical battles, tactical innovations, and strategic planning. They've turned warfare into a science that they study as intensively as we study stellar navigation.
The realization hit Zethkar with sudden clarity. The hegemony had encountered countless civilizations during their expansion, but they had never faced a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of warfare. Every human conflict, from ancient battles fought with primitive weapons to modern engagements using advanced technology, had contributed to a collective understanding of combat that exceeded anything the hegemony had developed. "Commander," the sensor operator reported, "I'm detecting additional launches from Earth. But these aren't military vessels, they appear to be carrying gifts." The tactical display showed dozens of small craft approaching the stellar dominion, each carrying what appeared to be examples of human art, music, literature, and cultural artifacts. The humans were simultaneously demonstrating their military capability and extending offerings of friendship. "Sir," the communications officer said, "I'm receiving a message from their world leader. She's inviting you to visit their planet as an honored guest, offering to provide tours of their military installations, and suggesting that hegemony officers could observe human training exercises." Zethkar stared at the message in disbelief. The humans wanted to show their enemies how they fought, teach them their tactics, and demonstrate their capabilities in complete detail. They were treating potential conquerors as honored guests and offering to share military secrets that most species would protect with their lives. "Commander," the technical officer announced, "I've completed my analysis of their technological development patterns. These humans haven't just advanced rapidly, they've been innovating constantly for their entire recorded history. They don't view technology as a static achievement but as an ongoing process of improvement and adaptation." The viewing screen showed human research facilities, manufacturing centers, and testing ranges where new weapons and defensive systems were being developed continuously. The humans weren't just maintaining their current capability, they were constantly improving it, driven by a cultural mindset that assumed any advantage was temporary and that survival required constant innovation. "Sir," the intelligence officer added, "their historical records show that they've survived multiple extinction-level threats through adaptation and cooperation. They've faced ice ages, volcanic disasters, asteroid impacts, and global conflicts, yet they've emerged stronger each time by learning from the experience." Zethkar began to understand why the humans had offered diplomatic solutions while demonstrating military strength. They had learned through bitter experience that survival often required both the ability to fight and the wisdom to know when fighting wasn't necessary. They had evolved beyond simple aggression to develop sophisticated strategies that maximized their chances of long-term survival. "Commander," the communications officer announced, "I'm receiving a final message from the human government. They're asking for your decision regarding their diplomatic proposal. They want to know if the hegemony is interested in peaceful coexistence or if they should prepare for extended conflict." Zethkar looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These were experienced officers who had participated in countless successful conquests, yet now they all wore expressions of uncertainty and respect. The humans had fundamentally changed their understanding of what was possible for a pre-space civilization. As he considered his response, Zethkar realized that he was facing the most important decision of his military career. The choice wasn't just between conquest and retreat, it was between maintaining hegemony doctrine and acknowledging that they had encountered something unprecedented in their expansion across the galaxy. Commander Zethkar stood in his private quarters aboard the Stellar Dominion, staring out the viewport at the blue and green planet that had shattered every assumption he held about primitive civilizations. The formal reports to Hegemony High Command lay unfinished on his desk. How could he explain what he had witnessed? How could he describe a species that had evolved to excel at warfare while simultaneously maintaining the wisdom to choose peace when possible? The door chimed, and his tactical officer entered the room. "Commander, we've received additional intelligence from the human government. They've provided us with detailed historical records of their conflicts, including tactical analyses and lessons learned from each engagement." Zethkar accepted the datapad and began reviewing its contents. What he read made his secondary heart skip beats. The humans hadn't just fought wars, they had studied them, analyzed them, and extracted knowledge from every conflict that could be applied to future challenges. They had turned the art of warfare into a science that they approached with the same methodical precision the hegemony applied to stellar navigation. "Sir," the tactical officer continued, "I've been studying their approach to conflict resolution. These humans don't just fight to win, they fight to end wars permanently. Their military doctrine includes extensive planning for post-conflict reconstruction and integration of former enemies into cooperative relationships." Zethkar looked up from the datapad. "They convert their enemies into allies?" "Yes, sir.
Their historical records show dozens of examples where former adversaries became close partners through careful diplomatic work after military conflicts ended. They appear to view warfare as a temporary state that should lead to more stable, peaceful relationships. The concept was foreign to hegemony thinking. When the hegemony conquered a world, they absorbed its resources and population into their empire. The idea of transforming enemies into willing partners through mutual respect and shared benefits was something they had never considered. "Show me their current military leadership," Zethkar ordered. The viewing screen in his quarters displayed profiles of human military commanders from around their planet. What he saw surprised him. These weren't the brutal warlords he expected to find leading a warrior species. They were scholars, scientists, and philosophers who had chosen military service as a means of protecting their civilization rather than advancing their personal power. "Commander," the tactical officer noted, "many of their senior officers hold advanced degrees in history, psychology, and political science. They study warfare as one component of larger social systems rather than as an end in itself." Zethkar read the profiles more carefully. Human military leaders were required to understand not just tactics and strategy, but also diplomacy, cultural analysis, and conflict prevention. They were trained to avoid wars when possible and to end them quickly when they became necessary. "Sir," the communications officer's voice came through the intercom, "the human government has transmitted additional materials they thought might interest you. They're sending examples of their military literature, strategic planning documents, and what they call War College curriculum." Zethkar reviewed the transmitted materials with growing amazement. The humans had created institutions dedicated to studying warfare from every possible angle. They analyzed historical battles not just for tactical lessons, but for psychological insights, logistical innovations, and strategic principles that could be applied in future conflicts. "Commander," his intelligence officer entered the quarters carrying another data pad, "I've been analyzing human military training programs. They don't just teach their soldiers how to fight, they teach them how to think. Critical analysis, creative problem solving, and adaptive decision-making are core components of their military education." Zethkar studied the training documentation, noting how human military doctrine emphasized flexibility and innovation. Unlike hegemony forces, which followed established protocols and procedures, human military units were trained to adapt their tactics in real time based on changing circumstances. "Show me examples of their adaptive tactics in action," Zethkar requested. The viewing screen displayed recordings of human military exercises where units faced unexpected challenges and developed novel solutions on the spot. Soldiers who had been trained in specific procedures abandoned them when circumstances demanded different approaches. Officers revised their strategies mid-battle based on new intelligence and changing conditions. "Sir," the tactical officer observed, "their military doctrine assumes that no plan survives contact with reality unchanged. They train their forces to expect the unexpected and to maintain effectiveness even when everything goes wrong." Zethkar realized this explained how the humans had responded so effectively to the hegemony's arrival. They hadn't just followed predetermined first contact protocols, they had adapted their existing defensive capabilities to address a threat unlike anything they had previously encountered. "Commander," the communications officer announced over the intercom, "we're receiving a transmission from the human leader who invited you to visit their planet. She's providing detailed information about the tour they've planned, including visits to military academies, training facilities, and active defense installations." Zethkar reviewed the proposed itinerary with fascination. The humans wanted to show him everything: their weapons, their tactics, their training methods, and their strategic planning processes. They were offering to share military knowledge that most species would consider classified beyond any security level. "Sir," the intelligence officer noted, "I've been analyzing their motivation for this unprecedented openness. They appear to believe that mutual understanding reduces the likelihood of future conflicts. By showing us their capabilities and methods, they're demonstrating that cooperation would be more beneficial than conquest." The concept challenged everything Zethkar had learned about interspecies relations. The hegemony maintained superiority through superior technology and information control. The idea of achieving security through transparency and mutual respect was completely foreign to their military doctrine. "Show me their peace treaties," Zethkar ordered. The viewing screen displayed dozens of human agreements that had ended conflicts and established lasting cooperative relationships. These weren't simple ceasefire documents, they were comprehensive frameworks for building mutual trust and shared prosperity between former enemies. "Commander," the tactical officer pointed out, many of their most successful alliances began as hostile relationships. They appear to excel at transforming conflict into cooperation through patient diplomatic work and mutual benefit arrangements. Zethkar studied the treaties more carefully, noting how they addressed the underlying causes of conflicts rather than just ending the immediate hostilities. Human diplomatic strategies focused on creating situations where former enemies benefited more from cooperation than they had from warfare. Sir, the intelligence officer added, their historical records show that species integration has made their civilization stronger rather than weaker. They've incorporated innovations, perspectives, and capabilities from dozens of different human cultures to create a more resilient and adaptable society. The observation struck Zethkar as profoundly important. The humans had achieved strength through diversity rather than uniformity. Instead of forcing conquered populations to abandon their unique characteristics, they had found ways to incorporate different approaches and perspectives into their overall capabilities. Commander, the communications officer announced, I'm receiving a personal message from their military leader. She's expressing genuine interest in learning about hegemony tactical innovations and suggesting that both our species could benefit from sharing military knowledge. Zethkar read the message with growing amazement. A pre-space civilization was offering to teach advanced alien species how to improve their military effectiveness while simultaneously requesting to learn from their expertise. The humans were proposing a genuine partnership between equals. Sir, the tactical officer noted, I've been studying their approach to military innovation. They don't just develop new weapons and tactics, they constantly re-evaluate their entire strategic philosophy to identify areas for improvement. The viewing screen showed human military research facilities where officers and scientists worked together to develop new approaches to defense and conflict resolution. They were simultaneously advancing their technological capabilities and refining their understanding of when and how those capabilities should be used. Show me their simulation programs, Zethkar requested. The display revealed sophisticated training systems where human military units practiced responding to hundreds of different scenarios, including first contact situations with alien civilizations. They had developed detailed protocols for dealing with species that might have different biological needs, communication methods, and cultural values. Commander, the intelligence officer observed, they've been preparing for contact with us longer than we've been aware of their existence. Their simulation programs include scenarios remarkably similar to our actual arrival and capabilities. Zethkar realized the humans had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had become a pre-space civilization capable of successfully defending against advanced alien threats through superior tactical thinking and strategic preparation. Sir, the tactical officer announced, I've completed my analysis of their military potential. Based on current observations, these humans could potentially defeat hegemony ground forces through superior tactics and innovative weapons deployment, even without technological advantages. The assessment hit Zethkar like a physical blow. A species that had never left their solar system had developed military capabilities that could threaten the most successful conquering force in known galactic history. Commander, the communications officer added, I'm receiving reports from other hegemony vessels throughout the sector. Word of human capabilities is spreading through the fleet, and several ship commanders are requesting permission to establish direct diplomatic contact. Zethkar understood the implications. The humans hadn't just impressed a single hegemony commander, they had demonstrated capabilities that would revolutionize galactic military thinking. Other species would want to study their innovations, learn their tactics, and potentially adopt their approaches to defense and conflict resolution. Sir, the intelligence officer said quietly, I believe we're witnessing something that will change the balance of power throughout the galaxy. These humans represent a new type of civilization, one that has achieved military excellence through intelligence and preparation rather than technological advancement. Zethkar stared at the planet below, watching as human defensive systems maintained their readiness while simultaneously supporting ongoing diplomatic communications. They had created the perfect balance between strength and wisdom, preparing for war while working to achieve peace. Commander, the tactical officer observed, they're not just defending their world, they're demonstrating a completely different approach to interstellar relations. If other species adopt human strategies and tactics, the hegemony's expansion methods may become obsolete. The realization crystallized Zethkar's growing understanding of what he was witnessing. The humans represented more than just a successful planetary defense, they represented the future of galactic civilization. Their combination of military excellence and diplomatic wisdom could potentially transform how species throughout the galaxy interacted with each other. As he prepared to respond to the human diplomatic proposal, Zethkar knew he was facing the most important decision of his military career. The choice wasn't just about this single planet, it was about whether the hegemony would adapt to a changing galaxy or be left behind by species that had learned more effective approaches to survival and prosperity. Commander Zethkar sat alone in his quarters, the formal resignation letter to Hegemony High Command completed on his personal terminal. 3 decades of military service, countless successful conquests, and an unblemished record of loyalty to the Empire, all ending with a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. The door chimed, and his senior staff entered without waiting for permission. Their expressions showed the same mixture of uncertainty and resolve that Zethkar felt in his core.
Commander, his tactical officer began, we've all submitted our resignation requests to the Hegemony personnel system. If you're planning to accept the human diplomatic proposal, we want to accompany you to Earth.
Zethkar looked at each face around the small conference table he had activated in his quarters. These were officers who had served with him for years, who had participated in dozens of planetary conquests without questioning hegemony methods. Now they were all prepared to abandon their careers for the opportunity to learn from a pre-space civilization.
You understand what this means? Zethkar asked. The hegemony will consider us traitors.
We'll never be able to return to our home worlds or contact our families. Sir, his intelligence officer replied, we've all studied the human materials they've shared with us. Their approach to military science, diplomatic relations, and conflict resolution represents advances that could benefit every species in the galaxy. This knowledge is too important to ignore because of bureaucratic protocols. The communications officer activated a display showing messages from other hegemony vessels throughout the sector.
Commander, we're not the only ones reaching this conclusion.
7 other ship commanders have submitted requests to establish extended diplomatic missions with human forces. The humans are offering military exchange programs to any hegemony officer interested in studying their methods.
Zethkar reviewed the messages with amazement.
The human government was inviting former enemies to participate in their military academies, observe their training exercises, and contribute to their strategic planning processes. They were treating potential defectors as honored guests rather than security risks. Sir, the tactical officer added, I've been corresponding with human military officers about their training programs. They're offering to create specialized courses that would allow hegemony personnel to study human tactical innovations while contributing our own knowledge to their research efforts. The concept was revolutionary. Instead of forcing captured enemies to abandon their original allegiances, the humans were creating opportunities for voluntary cooperation that benefited all participants. They had developed integration strategies that preserved individual identities while building collective capabilities.
Show me the response from Hegemony High Command, Zethkar ordered.
The communications officer displayed the official message that had arrived hours earlier. The tone was predictably harsh, condemning any consideration of negotiation with primitive species and demanding immediate implementation of standard conquest procedures. The hegemony leadership had dismissed human capabilities as impossible and ordered their fleet to proceed with planetary subjugation. Sir, the intelligence officer noted, High Command's response suggests they haven't actually reviewed the detailed reports we submitted. They're basing their decisions on assumptions rather than evidence.
Zethkar realized this represented a fundamental flaw in hegemony decision-making.
Their leadership had become so confident in their superiority that they no longer carefully analyzed challenges to their established procedures. They were responding to the human situation based on doctrine rather than facts.
Commander, the tactical officer announced, I'm receiving a transmission from the human government.
They're offering to establish a formal military academy on their moon specifically designed for alien species who want to study human strategic innovations. The proposal appeared on Zethkar's personal display, complete with curriculum descriptions, facility plans, and integration protocols that would allow non-human species to participate fully in human military education. They were offering to build an entire institution dedicated to sharing their most advanced knowledge with former enemies. Sir, the communications officer added, they're also proposing to establish research facilities where human and alien scientists could work together to develop improved defensive technologies. They want to create cooperative programs that would benefit multiple species simultaneously. Zethkar studied the proposals with growing conviction that his decision to resign was correct. The humans weren't just offering alternatives to hegemony conquest methods, they were demonstrating practical approaches to interstellar cooperation that could potentially transform galactic civilization.
Show me the latest intelligence on human military capabilities, Zethkar requested. The viewing screen displayed updated assessments of human defensive systems, revealing continued innovations that had emerged just in the days since first contact. The humans weren't static in their development, they were constantly improving their capabilities while simultaneously working to establish peaceful relationships. Commander, the intelligence officer observed, they've been sharing their defensive innovations with other pre-space civilizations in their local stellar region. Instead of hoarding their advantages, they're helping their neighbors develop better security capabilities. The observation reinforced Zethkar's understanding of human strategic thinking. They had recognized that their own security was enhanced by having capable allies rather than vulnerable neighbors. Their approach to defense focused on regional stability rather than individual superiority. Sir, the tactical officer announced, I'm receiving a personal message from the human military leader who invited us to visit Earth. She's providing detailed information about the transition process for hegemony personnel who choose to work with human forces. Zethkar read the message carefully, noting how the humans had developed comprehensive procedures for integrating former enemies into their military structure. They addressed practical concerns about cultural differences, communication barriers, and professional advancement while maintaining security protocols that protected sensitive information. Commander, the communications officer added, they're offering to provide housing, medical care, and educational opportunities for any dependents who accompany defecting hegemony personnel. They've created support systems that address the personal costs of abandoning our original allegiances. The thoroughness of human planning impressed Zethkar deeply. They had anticipated that military cooperation might require individuals to make difficult personal sacrifices and had developed programs to minimize the impact on families and civilian dependents. Show me their integration success rates, Zethkar ordered. The display revealed statistics showing how successfully the humans had integrated refugees, defectors, and former enemies into their military and civilian structures. The percentages were remarkably high, suggesting that their integration programs actually worked rather than serving as mere propaganda tools. Sir, the intelligence officer noted, their approach appears to be based on genuine respect for individual contributions rather than forced assimilation. They maintain cultural diversity while building unified operational capabilities. Zethkar understood that this represented a significant advantage over hegemony integration methods. The humans had learned to harness the benefits of different perspectives and approaches rather than demanding conformity to a single standard. Commander, the tactical officer announced, I'm receiving reports that human spacecraft are launching toward our position. But these aren't military vessels, they appear to be diplomatic transports preparing to provide transportation for any hegemony personnel who wish to visit Earth. The gesture demonstrated the level of trust the humans were placing in their former enemies. They were sending unarmed civilian craft to collect military officers from potentially hostile alien vessels, relying entirely on diplomatic agreements to ensure their safety. Sir, the communications officer added, the lead transport is requesting permission to dock with our vessel. Their captain wants to meet with you personally to discuss the logistics of establishing formal cooperation between human and hegemony military forces. Zethkar made his decision. Grant docking permission and prepare for transfer of all personnel who have submitted resignation requests. We're accepting the human diplomatic proposal. The bridge erupted in controlled activity as his staff began implementing departure procedures. Within hours, they would be aboard human spacecraft, beginning a journey that would fundamentally change their understanding of military science and interstellar relations. Commander, the intelligence officer said as they prepared to leave the stellar dominion, the humans have provided us with communication protocols that will allow us to maintain contact with other hegemony vessels. They want to ensure that information about their capabilities and cooperation programs reaches as many potential allies as possible. Zethkar realized the humans were implementing a long-term strategy to transform galactic military thinking through voluntary cooperation rather than forced conversion. They were confident that their approaches were superior enough that other species would choose to adopt them once they understood the benefits. As the human transport craft completed docking procedures, Zethkar took one last look at the bridge where he had commanded hegemony forces for so many years. He was leaving behind a career of conquest to join a species that had taught him more about warfare in a few days than he had learned in decades of military service. Sir, the tactical officer observed as they prepared to transfer to the human vessel, we're not just changing sides in a conflict. We're joining a completely different approach to military science that could revolutionize how species throughout the galaxy interact with each other. Zethkar nodded as he prepared to meet the human captain who would transport them to Earth. He was no longer a hegemony commander implementing conquest protocols. He was about to become a student in a military academy that would teach him to think about warfare, diplomacy, and interstellar relations in ways he had never imagined possible. The human transport captain who greeted him was a former enemy who had become a potential mentor. The species he had come to conquer had become teachers who could help him understand approaches to military excellence that transcended anything the hegemony had developed. As the transport craft separated from the stellar dominion and began its journey toward Earth, Zethkar watched his former command grow smaller in the viewport. He was leaving behind everything he had known to join a civilization that had shown him what true military excellence could achieve when combined with wisdom, diplomacy, and respect for other species. The journey to Earth would take several days, giving him time to study the human materials his new hosts had provided. By the time they reached the blue and green planet that had changed his understanding of what was possible, Zethkar would be ready to begin learning from the most remarkable military civilization he had ever encountered. The species that should have been an easy conquest had become his teachers. The pre-space civilization that should have surrendered without resistance had demonstrated capabilities that could transform galactic military thinking. The humans had won the most decisive victory possible. They had converted their enemies into allies through superior wisdom rather than superior weapons. As Earth grew larger in the transport's viewport, Zethkar prepared to begin the most important education of his military career.